Now we're going to focus on the nervous system. Now remember, the function of the nervous system is to maintain homeostasis. And remember, homeostasis is to create a balance, to keep things in balance and keep things normal. And this is done by electrical systems from the brain to the organs, to the muscles, to keep things functioning properly. It does provide sensation, as we talked about already in the integumentary system, that the skin is going to have different sense receptors, such as pressure, pain, different degree of temperature receptors as well. We just said that the nervous system is going to activate muscles, and we already learned that in the last chapter, as well as glands. And of course, we're familiar with the higher mental function and emotional function that the brain does provide in humans. Now, the role, as we break down the nervous system, is sensory input, means taking in, so it's gathering information, so it receives a stimuli, so it's taking in, maybe I touch something hot, okay, maybe it's something inside my body, maybe a chemical response in the organs, maybe I eat something that is maybe too spicy or some sort of food, okay, so that sensory input is gathered, and then it's going to be sent to the brain, so that's going to be the processing, the integration, and interpreting that sensory input and deciding, is there something to be done? So if I touch something hot, it quickly gets sent to the brain, and that brain says, okay, we need to fix this. And then the motor output is pulling the hand away, activating the gland, the organ, the structure to respond to it. Now, the nervous system is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is only the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is all the nerves branching out of the brain, out of the spinal cord, throughout the body, into the muscles and organs. And the peripheral nervous system is going to be separated and divided into sensory or afferent division, which is basically carrying information to the central nervous system. So if it's sensory, or A is beginning of the alphabet, okay, it's going to send it to the central nervous system, while the motor division, or efferent, is going to be sending it away. So E, okay, affect, okay, it's going to be sending it out of the brain and spinal cord so that our body can respond. And if it's somatic, you're going to have to just create these little hints to help you remember. If something's somatic, that's going to be voluntary. If it's autonomic, it's involuntary. So somatic, voluntary, we think about it, our muscles then respond to it. But autonomic is think about auto, okay, on its own. It's involuntary, so we're going to respond without thinking. That would be more of our digestive system. So you see the breakdown of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Again, here we have the sensory or afferent with A versus the efferent, which is the motor response. So is it being sent to the central nervous system? That's going to be your sensory. Or is it going to be sent to the motor, the muscles? That's going to be efferent. Okay, motor output to the muscles, effector. Here's some basic terms: irritability, the ability to respond to the stimuli, while conductivity is the ability to transmit the impulse. So to conduct, you're transmitting, you're carrying it through, okay? Now, some structures that you do need to be aware of is the gray matter and white matter. In the brain, the gray matter is going to be on the outside, white matter on the inside. But in the spinal cord, as you can see in the picture there, white matter is on the outside, so it's flipped, and gray matter is on the inside. So in the spinal cord, white matter is on the outside, gray matter on the inside. And then ganglia, if you remember what we learned with different smaller organisms. A ganglia is just a mass of nerve cells. So something we learn in biology, the little planaria has a brain-like organ, but it's not really an organ, it's just a mass of nerve tissue, and that's called a ganglia. So when we have a collection of these cell bodies outside of the central nervous system, so outside of the brain and the spinal cord, it's going to be called a ganglia. So you're going to have maybe a ganglion or a ganglia, okay, which is a mass of these nerve cells. Now, we already learned about the neuron, okay? So this is just straight review from tissues. You need to know the cell body, dendrites, axon. When we're talking about the synapse, that's going to be referring to the junction between the nerves, so that space. Specifically, the synaptic cleft is the gap. So when you hear a synapse, think about that space area. And then we also talked about the Schwann cells are the covering or the myelin around the axon. And then when there is a gap of the Schwann cell or the myelin, that little naked area of the axon, that's going to be the node of Ranvier. And when we have the myelin being deteriorated, that's going to be called multiple sclerosis. Okay, so some students have some issues or some questions about the depolarization and repolarization of the nerve impulse. But really all we're looking at is when we have a stimulus, a response, just like we've learned about calcium is going to be the main effector to cause muscles to respond. In the nerve, however, what I need you to know, and this is just real basic, all you have to do is communicate, and looking at the picture is that there's going to be a movement of sodium ions into the nerve, potassium then moves out of the nerve, and that movement of sodium inside, potassium outside is going to create this depolarization, going to create this impulse being sent. And then as it then switched back, okay, potassium outside, we're going to have this repolarization. So really all that's happening here is at the resting membrane, you have sodium on the outside, potassium on the inside. When the impulse starts, sodium is going to enter the axon, potassium is going to leave, and that's going to send the impulse down the axon. And this is going to be needed, or it's going to require ATP as well. Very similar to what we learned with the myosin and actin. So autonomic is involuntary. So this is heart, organs, blood pressure, glands, digestive system, things that you don't have to think about controlling or moving. Now, somatic is going to be voluntary, okay, moving of our skeletal muscles. So that's all you really have to think about here. Now we're going to specifically talk about the brain. We've already spent some time on this on some worksheets. So we're going to divide this up into 4 parts. And before we do that, let's just talk about the coverings. So the covering of the brain is referred to as the meninges. The meninges are a covering or a separation between the bone and the brain. So this is a cushion that God provided to protect the brain, these little tissues. And so you do have the outer, okay, meninge or tissue, that's called the dura mater. Then we go to the middle, that's the arachnoid mater. And then we go to the innermost, the pia mater or pia mater. As we looked at the brain, we have the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the large bulk of the brain divided into the left and right hemispheres. Now, here are some terms that you need to know that a gyri, G-Y-R-I, or gyrus, are the ridges, and the sulci or sulcus are the grooves going down. Now, if you have a very deep groove or large separation, that's going to be called a fissure, a fissure. Now, there's going to be 4 lobes of the cerebrum. That's going to be the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe. And we did talk about this already, as you were asked to kind of read through those worksheets and start kind of being aware of some of the functions. The frontal lobe is going to focus on speech. This is going to focus on impulses to the skeletal muscle, intellectual functions, while the temporal lobe is going to focus on hearing, smell, taste. Think about temporal as near the ear. The parietal lobes is going to be focused on sensations such as pain, hot and cold, touch, speech, and reading. So more sensations. And the occipital lobe would be more visual. And here in this picture, we have a picture of the gyri and sulci. We have an illustration of the gray matter being on the outside, white matter being on the inside, and the location of the lobes. Here are just some basic overall breakdown of what the brain does and impacts, and it's just mind-blowing about the detail of what the brain has to take care of. Now, the diencephalon, this basically is divided into the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. The thalamus, you will need to be aware of the focus on concentration, wakefulness, pleasantness, unpleasantness, okay, sending sensory impulses to the body. The hypothalamus, think of hypo meaning below. This is going to be referring to body temperature. So mainly regulation of body temperature, regulation of water balance, regulation of metabolism, appetite, thirst, okay, and emotions as well. Now the epithalamus is going to focus on especially part of that penile body, the endocrine gland, dealing with sexual maturity, growth, hormones, and then the cerebral spinal fluid, which we're going to talk about this fluid which acts as a bumper or protection of the brain and spinal cord. So you can see the diencephalon in this kind of location here, kind of part of this structure. You can see this location below the corpus callosum, okay, the white matter. And then we have the brain stem, which includes the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. As you can see right here, that starts going down to the spinal cord. And the midbrain primarily, okay, vision and hearing. The pons is going to be focusing on breathing. And the medulla oblongata focus on heart rate, breathing, swallowing, vomiting. So a lot of involuntary responses. And then moving into the cerebellum, we talked about the arbor vitae, this pattern. The cerebellum is still broken up into 2 hemispheres. And really the main focus here is balance and coordination and a lot of involuntary coordination. So coordination would be the key here. Then as we move to the spinal cord, we see the spinal cord is protected by the vertebrae, and the spinal cord is kind of divided into the same separations as the vertebrae. And then ending with the cerebral spinal fluid, the focus here is this cushion, this watery cushion that protects the brain and spinal cord, and it's somewhat similar to blood plasma in the composition.